The blizzard clawed at the world like a beast, in mourning its white fangs, burying the mountain town in relentless silence. Elena Ramirez trudged through the veil of snow, her boots sinking into the frozen earth as if it hungered for her warmth. She was a shadow of herself, a nurse whose hands had once cradled life, but now gripped only the numb echo of loss, her family stolen by a storm, much like this one, leaving her heart a hollow chamber where grief whispered endlessly. Each breath she drew stung like shards of ice, mirroring the desolation within a quiet detachment that kept her moving, searching for survivors in the void. In the distance, a faint silhouette emerged. Against the swirling white, a German shepherd paws, scraping furiously at a mound of snow that concealed a crumpled shack. His body trembled not from cold, but from some primal urgency, his muffled whines lost to the wind, a sentinel in despair, guarding a secret the storm threatened to claim forever. The mountain town huddled under a blanket of merciless snow, its wooden cabins half swallowed, like ancient relics drowned in a sea of white, their roofs sagging under the weight of unspoken burdens. Winds howled through narrow passes, carving ghostly trails that snaked between skeletal trees, their branches cracking like brittle memories under the assault. Emergency flares sputtered in the gloom, casting erratic shadows that danced like phantoms across the icy crust, where frost etched patterns resembling fractured veins, symbols of life teetering on the edge. Elena's flashlight beam sliced through the haze, revealing the dog's form more clearly. Echo, his coat encrusted with frost that glittered like shattered glass, circled the collapsed shack with mechanical desperation, his paws raw and bloodied against the unyielding drift. Subtle fissures spiderwebbed the snow around the structure, hinting at instability beneath a groan of timber here, a shift in the powder there, as if the earth itself conspired to bury whatever lay hidden. The cold seeped into Elena's bones, like an accusation echoing her isolation, while the dog's unyielding gaze pierced the storm, watchful, as though sensing a deeper peril lurking in the flakes that fell like forgotten secrets. The air thickened with threat, the blizzard a living entity pressing down, ready to entomb them all in its frozen embrace. Elena's knees buckled in the snow, her flashlight trembling in gloved hands as the storm's howl merged with the ghosts in her mind. She saw her husband's face in the swirling white, his laugh, his warmth snuffed out by a winter crash years ago, leaving her to drown in silence and regret for words she never said. Her daughter's tiny hand, once clutched in hers, now a phantom ache that pulsed with every frozen breath, a reminder of the life she couldn't save. She moved like a machine, a nurse trained to save others, but inside her heart was a locked room, its walls papered with numbness to keep the pain at bay. Echo's relentless digging clawed at that barrier, his raw paws, his refusal to quit a mirror to the fight she'd abandoned within herself. Tears froze on her cheeks, stinging like accusations, and she whispered to no one, "Why does it hurt to care?" The blizzard pressed closer, its cold, a cruel echo of her isolation, and in that moment Elena's fragile defenses cracked her soul, screaming for release while her body stood paralyzed, staring at the dog who refused to surrender. Echo froze, mid-dig his ears, twitching amber eyes, cutting through the blizzard to lock onto Elena's with a weight that felt like judgment. His gaze held secrets, old wounds, buried deep, as if he saw through her to the pain she hid. A faint cry, barely more than a breath, rose from beneath the snow, thin as a thread stretched to breaking, pulling Elena's heart like a hook. It was a child's voice, fragile, yet sharp enough to pierce the storm's roar, promising something irrevocable if she dared to act. Echo's head tilted, his body still, as though he sensed more than the cry, a shadow moving in the storm, unseen, but close watching. The moment hung suspended, a quiet pivot, where despair met possibility, whispering that this dog, this cry, would unravel everything she'd fought to bury. Elena's past flickered in her mind, like a film reel, caught on broken frames, each image vibrant yet jagged with grief. She had once been a woman of laughter, her home filled with her husband's off-key singing, and their daughter's crayon-streaked drawings, pinned to every wall, a life woven with warmth, now reduced to ashes, after a winter crash stole them both. The accident replayed in her dreams, the screech of metal, the snow swallowing their car, her screams unheard as she clawed at the wreckage, too late. Regret clung to her, like damp cold. She hadn't said, "I love you" that morning, hadn't hugged her daughter tight enough. Now in the mountain town, Elena lived as a ghost, her nursing shifts a mechanical ritual to outrun the silence of her cabin, where empty chairs mocked her solitude. She avoided their photos, their voices trapped in her throat, her heart a locked vault where love and loss battled, leaving her isolated, searching for a reason to keep breathing. Elena's days bled into one another, a gray haze of hospital corridors, and the bitter tang of coffee brewed to keep her awake through the void. Her cabin, perched on the town's edge, was a fortress of silence, its bare walls and single chair, a testament to her retreat from life. She moved through her shifts with practiced efficiency, checking charts, bandaging wounds, her hands steady, but her eyes distant, as if staring through the world to a place where pain couldn't reach. Mirrors were her enemy. The woman reflected back had hollow cheeks and eyes like shuttered windows, guarding a heart too fragile to face. She clung to routines, boiling water, folding linens, charting vitals as shields against the memories that lurked in quiet moments. Each night she sat alone, the wind rattling her windows. Like a plea, she ignored her numbness. A cocoon spun to keep the world and her own grief at bay. Echo's body told a story of betrayal, etched in scars beneath his matted fur, each mark a chapter of cruelty from a past he couldn't voice. Once the companion of a man, the kidnapper's brother, he had known fleeting loyalty, sleeping at the foot of a bed, ears pricked for praise that rarely came. But loyalty turned to chains. Harsh shouts and heavy hands taught him to flinch, his ribs growing sharp under neglect as he was tethered in a frozen yard, abandoned to the mercy of hunger and cold. His amber eyes, once bright with trust, dulled to wary embers, scanning for threats in every shadow. When his owner vanished, leaving him to roam the wild mountains, Echo's survival instinct sharpened a primal drive that kept him alive through frostbitten nights, scavenging scraps while dodging predators, both beast and man. Now his paws bled from digging, his frame gaunt, but unyielding, his silence a mirror to Elena's own each step, a testament to a will that refused to break, despite the weight of betrayal. His pain, like hers, was a quiet wound, stitched with the thread of endurance, waiting for someone to see beyond the scars. In the dim glow of the storm's aftermath, Elena and Echo stood as twin shadows, each carrying a void carved by loss, their eyes meeting in a language older than words. Her heart, locked behind walls of grief, echoed his guarded stance, hackles raised, body tensed, as if trust were a trap waiting to spring. She saw her own isolation in his reluctance to approach, the way he curled into himself against the cold, just as she shrank from human warmth to protect her fragile core. Their wounds mirrored one another, her silence born of a family lost, his from a master's cruelty, both tethered to survival by threads of stubborn will. In the quiet, their gazes held a fleeting recognition of shared emptiness, a silent promise that neither would force the other's walls to crumble. Slowly, through stolen glances and hesitant steps, they began a dance of trust, two broken souls circling the possibility that healing might begin in the space between their scars. The blizzard roared like a vengeful god, its icy claws tearing at the collapsed shack, where Echo's frantic paws churned snow into a frenzy, each scrape a desperate plea against the storm's suffocating weight. Elena staggered closer, her flashlight beam slicing through the swirling white, catching the glint of Echo's frost-caked fur and the blood streaking his raw paws, his body trembling, yet unyielding. A child's cry, faint, jagged like a needle through the wind, pierced the chaos, pulling her heart into her throat, a visceral shock that drowned out the storm's howl. The shack groaned timbers, shifting under snow's crush, threatening to bury the voice forever. Echo's eyes flicked to hers, wild with urgency, his growls swallowed by the gale, urging her to act. As the cold tightened its grip, the scene pulsing with raw danger, and the weight of a life hanging by a thread, Elena froze, her hands trembling as the cry echoed a sound that clawed at the walls she'd built around her heart. Logic screamed to turn back. Caring meant pain, meant reliving the loss of her daughter, her husband, the family she couldn't save. What if she failed again? The storm's howl mocked her fear, whispering that attachment was a wound waiting to reopen. Yet the child's voice tugged at her, fragile and insistent, like a pulse beneath ice. Echo paused, his head low, one bloodied paw lifted, as if testing her resolve. His amber gaze locking onto hers, not pleading, but waiting a silent challenge that stirred something buried deep. Her breath hitched, torn between the safety of numbness and the reckless pull of compassion, until that single steady look from Echo tipped the balance, urging her toward a choice she couldn't unmake. Elena dropped to her knees, snow biting through her gloves, as she joined Echo's desperate clawing, her hands fumbling against the frozen crust that sealed the shack's ruins. The wind screamed, flinging icy shards into her face, but the child's weakening cry, gasping, fading, drove her on her breaths, ragged with effort and fear. Echo worked beside her, his muzzle-dusted white paws tearing at splintered wood, until a gap opened, revealing a small, shivering form curled beneath debris. Clara barely conscious. Her lips blue clung to life like a flicker in a storm. Elena's hands shook as she pulled the girl free, snow slipping into her boots, her coat, her soul messy, frantic but real. Echo stood sentinel, his wary eyes scanning the dark, his low growl, a vow to guard them both, marking the moment Elena crossed from indecision to a commitment she couldn't retract. In the rescue truck's dim glow, Elena wrapped Clara in blankets, her nurse's instincts battling the tremor in her hands as she checked the girl's pulse, weak but stubborn. Echo, shivering and bloodied, lingered at the edge, his eyes locked on Clara, refusing to stray, despite the medic's prodding. On impulse, Elena called him closer, her voice soft but firm, offering him space in the truck's corner, a torn blanket, a scrap of jerky from her pack. He hesitated, then crept forward, accepting the food with a cautious sniff, his body still taut, but no longer retreating. Clara's silent stare met Elena's, a flicker of connection in her haunted eyes, binding them in a fragile triangle of survival. As the truck rumbled toward the hospital, Elena's whispered promise to keep them safe sealed an irreversible bond, a silent vow woven through their shared, trembling warmth. The hospital's fluorescent hum cast a sterile glow over the room where Clara lay, her small frame swaddled in blankets, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if it held answers she couldn't voice. Echo curled in the corner, his scarred body pressed against the cold tile, a low growl rumbling, when a nurse's footsteps neared too quickly. Elena sat between them, her own silence a mirror to their wariness, her hands folded tightly to hide their trembling. Echo's amber eyes flicked toward her, guarded, assessing, as if weighing whether her presence was threat or refuge. She didn't reach for him, didn't speak to Clara, respecting the invisible walls. Each had built walls she knew too well, forged in her own nights of wordless grief. Their shared stillness was a fragile truce, a space where pain stood watch, neither dog nor human nor child daring to cross the chasm of trust just yet. Elena knelt beside Clara, her fingers gentle as she cleaned frostbitten skin. The girl's flinches echoing the ache in her own chest, each touch a reminder of wounds too deep to name. Across the room, Echo watched his ears twitching, his bandaged paws still raw from the snow. Elena unwrapped a protein bar, breaking it into thirds, her movements slow, deliberate, as if handling something sacred. She slid a piece toward Echo, who sniffed it warily, his body tense, then took it with a quick snap, retreating to his corner. Clara's eyes followed her small hand, clutching her share, nibbling in silence. The act was simple food, bandages, breath, but it wove a thread between them, their shared pain, a quiet language. Echo's gaze softened, no longer fleeing, watching Elena with a stillness that felt like the first crack in their mutual armor. Elena's hand slipped the ceramic mug, crashing to the hospital floor, shards scattering like memories she couldn't hold. The sound yanked her back to a winter morning, her daughter's laughter as she dropped a cup, milk pooling like snow, her husband's teasing voice, promising to fix everything. The ache clawed at her, raw and unyielding, her breath catching as she knelt to gather the pieces, fingers trembling. Echo's sharp bark cut through the fog, low and urgent, pulling her eyes to his. He stood rigid, ears pricked, not retreating, but watching his gaze, a tether to the present. Clara flinched at the noise, her small hands clutching the blanket, yet she didn't look away. The dog's bark, the broken cup wove their pains together, a fleeting bridge of recognition, where Elena saw her grief mirrored in Echo's wary pause, a silent step toward trust. Clara's fingers twitched, reaching for a crayon, her first movement beyond necessity since the rescue. She drew a clumsy dog shape, and Echo, curious, nudged the paper, his nose leaving a smudge that coaxed a faint, fleeting smile from the girl, the first crack in her silence. Elena watched, her heart stuttering, and let out a soft laugh, the sound foreign, warming the sterile room like a candle's flicker. She tore a piece of bread from her lunch, offering it to Echo, who took it gently from her hand, his tail giving a single hesitant wag. The air shifted lighter, as if the cold that clung to them softened. Clara's eyes met Elena's, then Echo's, a triangle of tentative warmth forming. For the first time, the hospital felt less like a tomb, the spark of safety kindling in their shared quiet presence. The hospital room was a cocoon of quiet, the only sounds the soft beeps of Clara's monitor and the distant hum of a heater battling the mountain chill. Elena sat by the window, her gaze lost in the snow's endless dance, her hands idle, heavy, with the weight of another sleepless night. Echo, who had kept his vigil in the corner, rose silently, his scarred paws padding across the tile with a purpose that startled her. He stopped inches from her, his amber eyes searching hers, not with wariness, but with a raw, unguarded need. Slowly he leaned forward, resting his head on her knee, his warmth seeping through her scrubs, a surrender that cracked something deep within her. Tears welled unbidden as Elena's fingers hesitated, then brushed his fur, feeling the pulse of trust beneath. Clara watched from her bed, her small hand twitching, as if to reach out the moment binding them in a fragile, unspoken vow, a leap across the chasm of their shared fears, where healing began to take root. Night cloaked the hospital, its corridors dim and hushed, but tension stirred like a current beneath the calm. Clara whimpered in her sleep, her small body twisting under blankets, her murmurs sharp with fear, words like no and hide, slipping out, slicing the silence. Echo's ears pricked his body, snapping upright, a low growl rumbling, as he stared at the door, where shadows flickered under the gap, cast by someone pacing beyond. His hackles rose, his gaze darting to corners as if sensing a threat older than the storm. Elena's pulse quickened, her own nightmares, echoing Clara's flashes of her family's crash, the helplessness that haunted her. Echo's sudden bark, sharp and urgent, jolted her. His eyes fixed on the unseen, his instincts screaming of danger, creeping closer, a past that refused to stay buried. Clara's crayon slipped her drawing, a jagged house with barred windows, falling to the floor as a visitor entered, his boots heavy on the tile. Echo's growl erupted into a snarl, his body lunging forward, teeth bared as if the man's scent carried the sting of old wounds. Clara shrank into her bed, her eyes wide with terror. A scream trapped in her throat as she clutched the sheets, her silence shattering into panicked gasps. Elena's heart raced, memories of her own loss flooding back her daughter's face, her own screams in the snow mixing with the raw fear in Clara's eyes. "Get back," she shouted at the man, her voice cracking, her hands trembling as she shielded Clara, her body a barrier against the past. Echo's aggression mirrored her panic, his barks echoing the violence of chains and shouts from his days with the kidnapper's brother. Both withdrew Clara into her blankets, Elena into her fear, yet Echo's fierce stance held a shared recognition of a threat that tied their traumas together. The man, tall, with eyes like cold slate, stepped closer, claiming he was a concerned uncle. But Echo's snarl deepened, his body coiled, as if recognizing a lie woven into the man's voice. Clara's drawing, now crumpled on the floor, matched a cold case Elena had glimpsed in old files. A house, a child, a nightmare. The man's hand reached for Clara, and chaos broke. Echo lunged, knocking over a tray, instruments clattering like breaking bones. Elena shoved him back, her shout raw, "Don't touch her," as Clara's whimpers became a sob, her small body trembling. The man's gaze darkened, recognition flashing as Echo's teeth grazed his sleeve, a primal standoff erupting. Elena's hands shook, gripping Clara's bed, her fear colliding with resolve as the truth surfaced. This man was no uncle, but the kidnapper's brother. Tied to Clara's captivity, his presence a spark, igniting their shared terror into a tangible, inescapable threat. The hospital room fell silent, the air heavy with the echo of the confrontation, the man's retreating footsteps fading like a storm's last gasp. Elena slumped against Clara's bed, her hands trembling, regret flooding her for the shout that had escaped, for the fear she'd let spill. Clara curled tighter under her blankets, her eyes fixed on the wall, a mute withdrawal that mirrored Elena's own retreat into guilt. Echo paced to the corner, his body still taut, his low whine a thread of unease, his distance a mirror to the space they all needed. Yet as Elena's gaze met his, a silent promise flickered, his head tilted, eyes softening, as if vowing to stand guard. She reached out, not touching, but close enough for Clara to feel her warmth, for Echo to see her stillness reaffirming trust in the quiet. The trauma's shadow lingered, but their bond fragile as it was held firm, a whispered vow of safety sealing the wound. The mountain night pressed against the hospital windows, snowflakes swirling like ghosts, restless for answers. Echo's ears twitched, his body rigid as he stared beyond the glass, a low growl vibrating in his chest at the faint crunch of footsteps in the snow outside, deliberate, too close. Elena noticed the shift, her pulse quickening, as she caught a glimpse of a shadow moving past the frosted pane, its form blurred but purposeful. Clara's crayon paused mid-stroke, her latest drawing a figure in a doorway, trembling in her grip, her eyes darting to Echo as if he sensed what she couldn't say. The air thickened with unease, the hospital's sterile calm, now a facade hiding a stalker's approach. Echo's hackles rose, his gaze locked on the door, his instincts a warning that the past was circling closer, ready to confront the fragile safety they'd built. The hospital's back door creaked open, a gust of icy wind, carrying the scent of danger, as the kidnapper stepped inside, his silhouette sharp against the dim corridor, light eyes glinting with intent. Clara's breath hitched, her small body shrinking against Elena, who clutched her tightly, heart pounding like a trapped bird. Echo's snarl ripped through the silence, his body low and coiled fur bristling as he positioned himself between them and the man, whose voice, low taunting, called Clara's name like a hunter summoning prey. The man's hand twitched toward a hidden blade, his steps deliberate, closing the distance to reclaim what he'd lost. Elena's gaze darted to the locked door. The only escape blocked her mind, racing with memories of her own helplessness. Yet this time, she wouldn't fail. The room shrank to a pinpoint of raw peril, life and death balanced on the edge of Echo's bared teeth, and Clara's trembling silence, the threat no longer a shadow, but a blade poised to strike. Echo lunged, a blur of fur and fury, his jaws snapping inches from the kidnapper's arm, forcing him back as Clara's muffled cry pierced Elena's heart. Her arms tightened around the girl, shielding her, but her eyes locked on the man's blade, its glint a cold promise of endings. In that heartbeat, Elena's fear burned into resolve. She shoved Clara behind her, grabbing a metal tray to wield as a makeshift shield, her voice steady as she shouted, "Stay back." Echo's growl deepened, his body a wall of defiance protecting Clara as fiercely as Elena did. The kidnapper hesitated, his eyes flickering between the dog's teeth and Elena's unyielding stance, the air crackling with their shared defiance. In a surge of clarity, Elena chose to fight not just for Clara, but for the family she'd lost, for Echo's scars, for their fragile bond transforming terror into a fierce, unbreakable vow to protect, as Echo's snarl echoed her resolve, sealing their mutual stand against the darkness. Echo lunged, a blur of fur and fury, his jaws snapping inches from the kidnapper's arm, forcing him back as Clara's muffled cry pierced Elena's heart. Her arms tightened around the girl, shielding her, but her eyes locked on the man's blade, its glint a cold promise of endings. In that heartbeat, Elena's fear burned into resolve. She shoved Clara behind her, grabbing a metal tray to wield as a makeshift shield, her voice steady as she shouted, "Stay back." Echo's growl deepened, his body a wall of defiance protecting Clara as fiercely as Elena did. The kidnapper hesitated, his eyes flickering between the dog's teeth and Elena's unyielding stance, the air crackling with their shared defiance. In a surge of clarity, Elena chose to fight, not just for Clara, but for the family she'd lost, for Echo's scars, for their fragile bond, transforming terror into a fierce, unbreakable vow to protect, as Echo's snarl echoed her resolve, sealing their mutual stand against the darkness. The hospital room exhaled a fragile calm, its sterile air heavy with the scent of antiseptic and fading fear. Elena sat by Clara's bedside, her hands moving slowly, dabbing at a shallow cut on the girl's arm, each touch deliberate, as if stitching together more than skin. Clara's eyes were distant, fixed on the ceiling, her silence a void that echoed Elena's own, a hollow space where the night's terror still lingered, unvoiced. Echo lay at the foot of the bed, his bandaged paws tucked beneath him, his breathing soft but watchful, a quiet sentinel. The fight had left them raw, their movements sluggish, as if the weight of survival pressed them into the stillness. Outside, the snow fell gently now, no longer a threat, but a shroud, covering the chaos in a hush. Elena's fingers paused, her heart aching, with the quiet, each bandage a small act of mending. Yet the emotional void remained, a tender bruise they all carried in the slow, deliberate rhythm of their breaths. Days blurred in the hospital's soft light, where healing unfolded in whispers of motion. Clara's fingers brushing Echo's fur, Elena's hand lingering as she offered him water. Echo followed Elena's steps now, his shadow trailing hers through the corridors, his eyes meeting hers with a steadiness that felt like trust, carved from stone. Clara began to eat beside him, her small bites mirroring his cautious nibbles, their shared rhythm a silent conversation of recovery. When Elena adjusted Clara's blanket, the girl's gaze lifted, locking onto hers, a flicker of warmth passing between them, fragile but real. Echo nudged Clara's hand, his nose warm against her palm, and she didn't pull away. Each gesture, eye contact, a shared meal. A quiet lean wove their wounds together, the sensory hum of their presence, knitting a bond that grew stronger with every glance, every breath, every moment they chose to stay near. The hospital's doors opened to a world softened by dawn. The snow now a gentle blanket, under a sky breaking into pale gold. Clara bundled in a coat, stepped forward, her small hand brushing Echo's fur as he stood beside her, his tail giving a slow, deliberate wag when Elena called his name Echo, a sound that felt like home. He pressed his head against Clara's leg, warm and steady, and she leaned into him, her breath visible in the crisp air, a quiet release of fear. Elena walked beside them, their steps sinking in a rhythm that needed no words, each footfall a testament to trust forged in the dark. Their eyes met Clara's wide, Echo's calm, Elena's soft, and in that shared glance the weight of their pasts lifted, not gone, but lighter. A quiet rebirth blooming in the simple act of moving forward together.